Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a topic that I think is it's going to challenge how you think about nature.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we're asking a really specific question. Is it possible to take a strict hacker mindset, like rigorous systems engineering, and apply that to something as messy and unpredictable as dirt in plants?
Right. It's like the ultimate compatibility test. You've got silicon logic on one side and just pure biological chaos on the other.
Exactly. And to figure this out, we are looking at a really bizarre stack of sources today.
Yeah, bizarre is the word.
We have this cultivation guide. It's called the MadLabz Cannabis Project. But we don't just have the guide. We also have the commercial footprint of the author.
Which is where the real story starts, I think.
Right, because normally when you dive into agriculture or botanical science, you expect a specific kind of source. You know, farmers who have worked the land for generations.
Or university extension offices, botanists in lab coats.
Yeah.
Big agricultural companies with massive research budgets.
Yeah, exactly. We have none of that.
Not even close.
We have an eBay profile.
A highly specific and very strange eBay profile.
So I spent a good chunk of my morning just scrolling through this seller's inventory. The account is called MadLabz Resale. And if you're listening and trying to build a psychological profile of this person based just on what they sell, I think you basically end up with a modern mad scientist.
Yeah, it's a total cabinet of curiosities, just a wild mix.
I really want to list a few of these items for you because the vibe is so important before we even get to the plants. So what's on the first metaphorical shelf here?
Okay, so on one hand, you have high-end raw electronics components.
Right.
We're talking ATmega 328P microcontrollers.
Which are what exactly?
They're essentially the brains of Arduino boards. It's factory-fresh integrated circuit chips. This is the kind of stuff you buy if you are building a custom weather station from scratch, or happing a robot, or prototyping a gadget.
So very hard engineering, logic, writing code.
Precisely. But then literally right next to the microcontrollers, you have 3D printed subwoofer enclosures, specifically for B2 Audio Rampage speakers.
Which is a whole different discipline. That implies a deep obsession with acoustics, right? Yeah. Vibration, air pressure, trying to get the absolute perfect bass response out of a speaker.
Yeah, it's physical engineering. And then you hit the third pillar of this inventory.
This was the part that made me laugh.
Sealed vintage VHS tapes.
Like Bambi.
Yep. Bambi, The Wizard of Oz, Forrest Gump, just pristine VHS tapes.
Oh, and the 3D printed Rick Sanchez figure from Rick and Morty. We can't forget Rick.
Right, of course. So you have this retro pop culture collector, an audiophile, and an electronics engineer all rolled into one.
And sitting right smack in the middle of this digital garage sale is a highly technical first edition book on how to grow massive resinous colas outdoors in USDA Zone 6A.
It seems completely random at first glance, like they just cleaned out an attic and threw it all online.
It really does. But as I was reading through the actual cultivation guide, I started to see the threads connecting it all. It's actually not random, is it?
Not at all. In fact, the mindset is the most consistent thing about this whole profile.
How so?
Well, think about what a microcontroller is, right? It's a closed system of inputs and outputs. You write specific code to control specific variables. Yeah. And if you think about a subwoofer enclosure, it's all about managing airflow, controlling pressure to maximize the sonic output.
So a garden.
To MadLabz, a garden is just a biological circuit board.
Wow.
You have your inputs, the sun, the water, the nutrients. You have your processor, which is the soil. And you have your output, which is the flower. MadLabz has basically written a manual that treats a living organism with the exact same engineering rigor you would use to calibrate a 3D printer or wire a circuit.
That right there is the hook for me.
Yeah.
Because this isn't some peace and love, let's vibe with Mother Nature kind of guy.
No, definitely not.
This is a strict how do we overclock the photosynthetic engine kind of manual.
Overclocking is the perfect word for it, because you have to remember the constraint they are working under. The guide is specifically calibrated for USDA Zone 6A.
Let's pause on Zone 6A for a second.
Yeah.
Because if you're not a walking farmer's almanac, that might not mean much. Where are we geographically, and what are the rules of this zone?
Sure, so think about the American Midwest. Parts of the Northeast, maybe some higher elevations in the Appalachian Mountains.
Okay.
The defining characteristic is that you have 4 very distinct, very harsh seasons. You do not have that luxury of the endless California summer.
Right.
And you don't have a perfectly controlled indoor lab environment where you control the climate. You have a rigid start date, which is your last frost, usually in May.
Yeah.
And you have a hard stop date, which is your first frost in October.
It's a ticking clock.
Exactly. It's a desperate race against time. So if you just toss a seed in the dirt and hope for the best in Zone 6A,
What happens? You fail.
or you end up with this tiny, anemic little plant that freezes to death before it even finishes flowering.
So to get these monster results, the guide is promising you have to be aggressive.
You have to optimize literally every single day of that calendar. You are hacking the local environment to make the plant think it has more time and better conditions than it actually does.
All right, so let's look at the first hack.
Yeah.
And honestly, reading this was the one that felt the most radical to me. It's all about the soil.
Section 1. The soil as a living entity.
Yeah. Because I think most of us, right, we view soil as just dirt. It's a sponge.
Right.
You pour water and fertilizer into the sponge holds it, and the plant drinks it. It's totally passive. It's just the stuff that keeps the plant from falling over.
And that right there is the industrial agriculture model, viewing soil purely as a medium, just a dead physical placeholder while we pump in liquid chemical salts.
But MadLabz rejects that.
Entirely. The guide has this amazing line where it refers to the soil as the garden's brain circulatory system and immune system.
The brain,
Yeah.
I mean, that is a heavy metaphor. Unpack that a bit. How can dirt be a brain?
It all comes down to connection and signaling. In truly healthy soil that hasn't been completely destroyed by chemical pesticides or deep tilling, you have these microscopic fungal networks.
Mycelium, right?
Yes, mycelium. They look like these incredibly fine, tiny white threads running endlessly through the earth.
I've seen macro photography of this. It literally looks like a neural network or like a map of the internet.
Structurally, it's almost identical to a neural network, and functionally it acts like one too. These fungi physically connect the root systems of different plants across huge areas.
And they transport things.
Right, they transport water and nutrients, but crucially, they transport information.
Information. Like what kind of information are plants sending to each other?
Chemical stress signals. For example, if a plant on the far left side of your garden gets attacked by aphids, it can actually send a chemical warning signal down into its roots through this fungal internet, all the way to a plant on the far right side.
Just warning the neighbors.
Exactly. The neighboring plant receives that signal and it starts boosting its own immune defenses. It starts pumping bitter compounds into its leaves before the aphids have even crossed the yard.
That is wild. So the plants are literally talking to each other.
They are communicating, and the soil is the network infrastructure facilitating it.
So when MadLabz references the Wood Wide Web, they aren't just being poetic or spiritual. They're describing a hardline physical connection.
A literal biological information highway.
Yes.
And this is exactly why the guide enforces a very strict no-till policy.
This part surprised me because I grew up seeing farmers tilling fields every spring. Rototillers are like the ultimate gardening tool. You churn up the dirt to make it nice and soft for the new seeds. Why is MadLabz so against tilling?
Well, think about that network we just described. Imagine the soil is a massive computer server room.
Okay.
You've spent years laying down this incredibly complex, intricate cabling system underground, the mycelium connecting all your servers together. Tilling your garden is the equivalent of taking a chainsaw to your server room.
Oh, wow. So you're just severing all the cables.
You're completely destroying the infrastructure.
Wow.
You might make the top layer of dirt look fluffy and visually pleasing for a couple of weeks, but you have fundamentally lobotomized the soil. You've cut all the hard lines.
Right.
MadLabz argues that if you want a plant to perform at peak efficiency, if you want it overclocked, you cannot disrupt that network, ever. You have to layer organic matter on top exactly like a forest, drops leaves in the fall, but you never, ever dig down and rip those cables apart.
So we treat the soil like delicate hardware. We don't smash the motherboard.
Exactly.
But we do still have to feed it. And this is where we get into what I can only describe as the mad scientist reality of this guide. I'm looking at the section on organic amendments.
Ah, yes. The buried treasure technique.
Yeah. It sounds like a pirate movie, but the reality is much more visceral. The guide suggests, actually, no, it insists on burying whole fish in the dirt.
Yes. Whole raw fish.
Not fish meal from a garden center. Not that fish emulsion liquid that comes in a plastic bottle. We are talking about going to the grocery store or the fish market, buying a whole mackerel or catching a trout and burying the actual entire carcass directly in the garden bed.
I know, it is jarring to read a technical manual in the 21st century that tells you to do this. It feels medieval.
It feels like a pagan ritual. I really have to ask, is this actual science or is this just folklore?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like something you do at midnight under a full moon to curse your enemies.
It is actually profound chemistry, but the key is that it's slow chemistry. And that is the fundamental difference between this method and buying that blue synthetic stuff in a plastic bottle.
Okay, walk me through the reaction then. I dig a hole, I bury a dead fish. What is actually happening down there?
Okay, so if you use a bottle of synthetic fertilizer, what you're applying are water-soluble salts, pure nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. You pour it into the dirt, and then the plant gets hit with a massive dose of it instantly.
Like drinking a double espresso on an empty stomach.
Exactly right. High energy, immediate uptake, and a massive potential for a crash. Plus, it does absolutely nothing to build the long-term structure of the soil.
Okay.
Now look at the fish. A fin carcass is a highly complex biological structure. It's fat, proteins, scales, bones, organs. As it sits in the soil, it decomposes, but it breaks down in stages. And this is where the engineering mindset comes in. MadLabz is engineering a timeline.
How so? What's the timeline?
First, the soft tissues, the organs, and the meat break down. That happens relatively quickly within the first few weeks of spring. That decomposition releases a massive spike of nitrogen.
And nitrogen is what the plant uses for green growth, right? Leaves and stems.
Yes. Nitrogen is the fuel for the solar panels. And this happens right at the beginning of the season in May and June when the plant desperately needs to build its infrastructure.
So the timing is perfect.
It is. Then as the summer progresses, the meat is gone and the bones start to decompose. Bones are made of harder materials, right? They are incredibly rich in phosphorus and calcium.
Uh-huh.
This takes months to break down. Guess when the plant suddenly needs a massive influx of phosphorus?
It's later in the season.
Yeah.
When it starts to flower.
Exactly. In August, phosphorus is the energy transfer molecule. It is the core battery power for the bloom phase. So just as the plant is switching its biological gears to produce flowers in late summer, the fish bones from May are finally dissolving and releasing the exact right fuel at the exact right time.
That is brilliant. So the fish is essentially a biologically programmed time-release capsule.
Exactly. It's hardware with a built-in delay. And the potassium from the scales and the cartilage breaks down slowly too, which helps build really rigid cell walls, making the plant sturdy enough to handle the fin later on.
I get the science now, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
I live in a regular suburban neighborhood. If I bury a dead mackerel in my backyard, am I not just setting up a giant neon buffet sign for every raccoon, possum, and neighborhood stray cat in a 5-mile radius?
Yeah. That is the #1 risk factor, and the guide is very upfront about it. You can't just lightly cover it with dirt. You have to bury it deep, at least 12 to 18 inches down.
Okay.
And usually for the first month or so, you have to put a heavy paving stone or a layer of hardware cloth wire mesh right over the spot to mask the scent and physically block anything from digging it up.
So there's a strict security protocol involved with the fish.
Oh, always. But if you think about the maker mindset again, it makes perfect sense. A synthetic fertilizer is just a prepackaged consumer solution. Burying a fish requires you to understand the raw materials from first principles.
Right.
It's knowing that fish equals NPK plus calcium, and knowing that the rate of decomposition perfectly matches the length of the Zone 6A growing season. You are engineering the input manually.
And reading this, it immediately reminded me of the Native American Three Sisters method of agriculture. You know, corn, beans, and squash grown together.
Yes, absolutely. Indigenous agriculture has always understood that the soil is basically a stomach.
The stomach.
Yeah. You aren't feeding the plant. You have to feed the digestion process of the soil. When you bury that fish, the plant's roots cannot physically eat a piece of fish meat.
All right, obviously.
Bacteria eat the fish. The microbes consume it, they multiply, and then they excrete waste. The plant eats the bacterial waste. It's a biological process called mineralization.
So MadLabz is essentially catering a massive banquet for bacteria.
Exactly. They know that if the bacterial colony thrives, the plant will automatically be pushed to its absolute limits.
I really like that framing. We aren't really growing plants. We are ranching bacteria. The MadLabz plants are just a byproduct of having a very happy herd of microbes.
That is the defining philosophy of the entire living soil movement, and it perfectly bridges into how they engineer the second major variable, water.
Oh man, the watering section. This is where I really felt the electronics nerd jumping off the page, because this is not a sprinkler system.
No, this is advanced hydroengineering.
We're in section 2 here. The guide demands what it calls a dual-layer water system. And step 1 is a trip to the hardware store to buy black corrugated drainage pipe.
Yep, 6-inch diameter thick plastic pipe. You buy a roll of it and cut it into 1-foot lengths.
Okay, so paint a picture of this schematic for me. I'm standing in my garden. I've got my plant in the middle. What am I doing with these plastic pipes?
You are burying these foot-long pipes vertically straight down into the dirt about 2 feet away from the base of the plant.
Okay.
You bury them so the top rim of the pipe is exactly flush with the topsoil. So if you're just looking at the garden from above, all you see are these black plastic circles in the dirt forming a perimeter around the plant.
It almost looks like a drainage vent. Or like an exhaust pipe.
Right, but it acts as an injection port.
Right.
This is the deep layer of the dual-layer system. And the logic driving this is based on a botanical concept called hydrotropism.
Hydrotropism. Break that down.
It's root behavior.
Yeah.
Roots naturally seek out and grow toward moisture. But roots are also inherently opportunistic, or lazy if you want to anthropomorphize them.
Sure.
If you water your garden with a traditional surface sprinkler, all the water sits right there in the top 2 inches of the soil. The roots sense that. And they say, well, the water is right here at the surface. Why would we expend energy digging down?
Makes sense.
So they spread out laterally. They form this shallow, flat pancake of roots right at the top of the dirt.
Which sounds perfectly fine until...
Until July hits in Zone 6A, until you get a 3-week heat wave with no rain. That top 2 inches of soil will bake dry in a matter of hours under the afternoon sun.
And the roots are trapped up there.
Exactly. Suddenly your plant is massively stressed because its entire water source just evaporated. Or worse, what happens when a late summer thunderstorm rolls through with high winds?
Shallow roots mean poor anchorage.
Right. The plant acts like a sail, catches the wind, and with no deep taproots to provide leverage, it just falls right over and snaps.
So these vertical pipes, it's basically tough love for the roots.
It's forced training. When you pour your water directly down into these pipes, you are depositing the moisture a full 12 inches underground, completely bypassing the surface level.
So the surface stays dry.
Mostly dry, yes.
Yeah.
The roots sense that massive reservoir of water deep down, and they are biologically forced to dive for it. They dig deep, hard, vertical paths to tap into that pipe.
You are artificially forcing it to build a massive anchor.
You are engineering a structural foundation. A plant with deep roots is highly drought tolerant and it's wind resistant. It can physically support the massive heavy colas we are trying to grow later. If you don't engineer the foundation in June, you can't build the skyscraper in September.
Okay, but the guide specifically calls it a dual layer system. So we have the deep pipe for the roots. What is the surface layer doing?
Well, this loops right back to our fish-eating bacteria. Remember, almost all the beneficial microbial life in the soil lives in the top 4 inches. That's the aerobic zone where the oxygen is.
Right.
If you only water down the pipes and you let the top 4 inches turn into dry, lifeless dust, your entire microbial city dies of dehydration.
So we have a direct conflict of interest.
Exactly. We want deep water to force root structure, but we absolutely need surface moisture to keep the bacteria alive so they can eat the fish.
So how does MadLabz solve the conflict?
By entirely separating the inputs. You flood the deep pipes heavily to train the plant roots, but then you take a gentle mister or a very light sprinkler and you wet the surface of the topsoil just enough to keep the biology humming.
Wow.
You are no longer watering the plant at the surface. You are only watering the brain.
That is remarkably complex. It immediately reminds me of custom cooling loops in high-end gaming PCs. You know, you might run a closed liquid cooling loop directly over the CPU to manage the extreme heat, but you still need separate ambient airflow fans for the motherboard components.
That is a perfect analogy. You have an isolated root loop and an isolated microbial loop.
And speaking of loops and fluids, we have to talk about the primary additive mentioned in this section.
The secret sauce, unsulfured molasses.
Right, again with the grocery store ingredients.
Yeah.
Why are we pouring pancake syrup into the ground? Isn't this just bro science? Like something a guy in a forum made up?
It definitely sounds like bro science at first, but it's actually mimicking a highly advanced natural process involving root exudates.
Root exudates, what are those?
In nature, when a plant photosynthesizes, it creates liquid sugar, glucose. It uses sunlight to manufacture this sugar, but it doesn't keep all of it. The plant will actually physically push up to 30% of its hard-earned sugar out through its roots directly into the soil.
Why would it just give away its energy like that?
To pay the bacteria. It's a transaction. The plant pumps out glucose as currency. It's essentially saying, here's some pure energy. Please go break down that fish bone and bring me back some usable nitrogen and phosphorus.
It's literally a localized economy. The plant is paying for mining services.
Exactly. So by you adding a heavy pour of molasses to your watering, you are artificially flooding the local market with free currency. You are giving the bacterial colony a massive sugar rush without the plant having to expend any of its own energy to feed them.
So the bacterial population just explodes.
Exponentially. And because there are suddenly billions of hyperactive microbes in the dirt, they metabolize the nutrients, the fish, the compost, the natural minerals so much faster. It drastically accelerates the overall metabolic rate of the entire garden system.
But I noticed the guide is incredibly specific about the type of molasses. It has to say unsulfured on the label. Why does that matter so much?
Because sulfur is a highly effective antimicrobial agent. It's used as a harsh preservative in things like dried fruit to stop mold and bacteria from growing on it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. If you buy regular sulfur molasses and pour it into your meticulously crafted dual-layer soil system, you are basically dropping a nuclear bomb on the microbial city you just spent months building. You will kill all the bacteria instantly.
So reading the ingredients is quite literally life or death for the garden.
Absolutely critical. It's the thin line between supercharging the system and completely poisoning it.
This level of operational detail, it just keeps reinforcing that sysadmin vibe. We aren't just sitting in a lawn chair watching things grow. We are actively managing system parameters. We're checking moisture depth, managing microbial populations, calibrating the pH.
And we haven't even touched the most important energetic parameter of all yet, the primary power source.
The sun.
Yes.
Let's move into section 3, solar mastery. Because apparently, according to MadLabz, we aren't just planting things where it looks sunny, we are supposed to be mapping the sun.
Right. If the soil is the hard drive and the water is the coolant system, the sun is the raw power supply. And remember, we are in zone 6. We are running on a limited battery. You only have a finite number of sunlight hours before autumn hits.
Right, the ticking clock.
MadLabz demands that you treat sunlight as energy, currency, and information.
Okay, energy and currency I get based on what we just talked about. But information.
The spectrum of the light actually tells the plant what season it is. Blue light in spring triggers vegetative growth. Red spectrum light in late summer triggers flowering. But let's focus on the currency aspect first, because the guide strongly emphasizes what they call the full-term strategy.
Full term meaning you plant outside the absolute second the frost risk is over.
Yes. A lot of modern growers use autoflowers now. These are genetically modified plants that grow very fast, stay very small, and finish in a couple of months regardless of the sun.
But MadLabz rejects those.
Completely rejects them. They want the full 6-month season. Why? Because you absolutely need that long vegetative phase, May, June, and July, to build the factory.
By factory, you mean the physical size of the plant.
Yeah.
The branches and leaves.
Yes, the leaf canopy and the root mass. The guide posits a direct mathematical correlation. The physical size and weight of your final harvest is directly proportional to the sheer volume of infrastructure you managed to build during those first 3 months. You spend all summer collecting solar currency to invest in the frame.
And to collect maximum currency, you need perfect orientation.
Sun mapping, which actually dates back to ancient Mesopotamian farming techniques. If you live in the northern hemisphere, the sun always arcs across the southern half of the sky.
Right.
So your garden beds must strictly face south with 0 obstructions. But MadLabz goes a step further and gets extremely paranoid about something they call shadow competition.
Yeah, shadow competition. That sounded so aggressive when I read it, like a corporate hostile takeover.
It's a literal resource war. If plant A grows taller and casts a shadow on plant B, plant A is actively stealing photosynthetic currency from plant B. The guide treats a shadow not just as shade, but as a physical obstacle that damages the crop.
So how do you engineer a solution to a shadow?
Extreme spacing. MadLabz advises placing the plants much, much wider apart than any normal gardening book would tell you to. When you plant them in May, they look tiny and ridiculous sitting 6 feet apart.
Right, because they're just little seedlings.
Yeah, but you have to model the 3D space in your head. You have to imagine that plant fully grown, 6 to 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide. You have to guarantee that even at 4 p.m. in late September, when the sun is low on the horizon, they are not casting any shadows on each other.
It's literally urban planning. You wouldn't zone a 50-story skyscraper right next to a ground-level solar farm.
Precisely. You have to model the 3D zoning laws of the garden.
Now, once the plant actually starts filling out that space, MadLabz doesn't just let it take its natural shape, right? And this brings us to section 4, canopy sculpting.
Yes.
And this is where the engineering mindset gets, well, I wrote down the word ruthless in my notes.
Sculpting is a very polite word for what they're doing. Hacking, or maybe amputating, might be more accurate. The core concept here is energy channeling.
The guide details a practice called selective defoliation. And they operate by this strict law. called the 25% rule.
Right. To understand this, you have to understand the plant's biological imperative. A plant in nature only wants one thing: to survive and make a few seeds.
It's not trying to win an award.
Exactly. So it hedges its bets, it sends a little bit of energy to every single branch and every single tiny leaf, even the ones buried deep at the bottom of the bush in the pitch black.
It spreads the wealth around evenly.
Right. But the grower does not want mere survival. The grower wants premium massive flowers, specifically at the top. So the 25% rule says you look at the plant. Any leaf or any small branch in the lower half of the plant that receives less than 25% of the available direct sunlight is officially classified as a freeloader.
A freeloader. It's so harsh to call a leaf a freeloader.
It is entirely non-sentimental. The guide argues that these shaded bottom leaves are basically parasitic. They consume valuable sugars to stay alive through respiration, but because they are in the shade, they do not produce enough energy through photosynthesis to pay for their own upkeep.
They are a net loss on the balance sheet.
Exactly. They are a bad investment.
So what does MadLabz say to do with them?
Delete them.
Just cut them off.
You take a pair of sterile scissors and you completely strip the bottom third of the plant. You remove all the lower legs. No leaves, no tiny branches, bare stalks.
And the logic there is that the hydraulic pressure and the sugars that would have been wasted on those tiny bottom leaves
Is instantly redirected violently upwards. The plant has a finite amount of internal water pressure. If you physically cap off all the bottom exit valves, that pressure shoots straight up the main vascular system to the very top branches.
which are the ones bathing in full sunlight anyway.
Exactly. The result is what the guide calls vertical columns of growth.
Yeah, it says you basically turn a chaotic, messy bush into a streamlined, vertical machine, pushing every drop of resource to the penthouse.
Right. The text actually compares this directly to French vineyard trellising or Japanese bonsai techniques.
Right, trimming for purpose.
It's the exact same foundational principle. In bonsai, you prune to force a specific aesthetic line. In French vineyards, they prune heavily, so only a few clusters of grapes get all the terroir. Here we are pruning strictly for energy efficiency. We are minimizing the plant's overhead costs to maximize the final profit margin at the top of the canopy.
There is also a secondary reason for this, right?
Yeah.
A defensive aspect. It's not just about redirecting energy. The guide talks a lot about airflow.
Oh, absolutely. This is crucial for survival in Zone 6A. Remember, we're dealing with hot, incredibly humid Midwestern or East Coast summers.
Right.
Humidity is the ultimate enemy of dense flowers. It leads directly to powdery mildew, which is this horrific fungal infection that can coat your entire plant in white fuzz and ruin a 6-month crop overnight.
And mold and mildew love stagnant dead air.
They thrive in it. If you leave a dense, tangled thicket of leaves at the bottom of the plant, right near the wet soil, you create a localized microclimate,
Right.
a dark, humid pocket where air physically cannot move. It's a perfect incubation chamber for mold spores.
So by stripping the legs bare,
You open up the undercarriage, you allow the ambient wind to blow straight through the bottom of the garden, it continuously dries out the center stalk. It's passive climate control.
once again we're using geometry to solve a biological problem. No chemical fungicides, no sprays, just changing the physical architecture of the plant.
Geometry as a primary defense mechanism. It's brilliant.
Okay, so we have built our deep root structure, we've fed our microbial internet, we've channeled all the solar energy to the top of the plant. Now the calendar turns. We are moving into late summer. The days are noticeably getting shorter. The plant senses this and signals that it's time to reproduce. We enter section 5, the flowering phase.
The great shift. This is the transition where the plant completely stops growing vertically and focuses all its remaining energy on growing outward into dense flowers.
And according to the guide, the entire diet has to change right now. They specifically mention a commercial product here, which is rare for this guide. Fox Farm Cultivation Nation Bloom. But I'm less interested in the brand name and much more interested in the raw numbers printed on the bag. The NPK ratio is 0.54.
That ratio tells the whole story of the late season. 0 nitrogen, 5 parts phosphorus, 4 parts potassium.
Why 0 nitrogen? I thought nitrogen was like the fundamental building block of plant life.
It is for leaves and green growth. But at this stage, late August, we already have all the leaves we need. The solar factory is fully constructed. We do not want a single ounce of new green leafy growth. We only want dense floral clusters.
So what happens if you accidentally keep feeding it nitrogen in September?
The plant gets biologically confused. It receives a chemical signal telling it to grow green infrastructure, so it starts stretching out. It makes loose, airy, leafy buds instead of tight, dense ones. It actively delays the ripening process. MadLabz says you must shut off the nitrogen tap completely.
It's a chemical override that says, stop building the factory and start manufacturing the product.
Precisely.
And the high phosphorus and potassium.
Phosphorus is the ATP, the cellular energy transfer molecule necessary to stack those floral cells. Potassium regulates water pressure and creates the resin and the density. And remember what is happening underground right now.
The fish bones.
Yes, the bones. So while you are adding this liquid fox farm nutrient from the top, the deep soil is simultaneously releasing its own massive long-term reserve of organic phosphorus.
It's a dual-pronged attack. And they also mentioned keeping up the molasses schedule during this phase.
The feedback loop, yes. They explicitly state to use molasses biweekly during the heavy bloom because the soil needs to stay incredibly hot.
Hot meaning biologically active.
Right. Millions of microbes churning away. Those microbes intercept that fox farm nutrient, break it down, and make it instantly bioavailable to the roots. You are essentially redlining the engine for the final lap of the race.
The guide gets surprisingly descriptive in this section, almost poetic. It starts talking about vibrant purple hues and insanely sticky trichomes as the visual reward for dialing in this diet perfectly. But it also issues a stark warning about late-stage risk management. We are in the home stretch, but nature can still ruin everything.
Wind and heavy rain. In Zone 6A, autumn almost always brings severe storms. The guide discusses how you use the wind earlier in May and June to stress drain the stalks to make them thicker.
Right, building the foundation.
But in the final weeks, you actually have to protect that investment.
Because these massive colas we've engineered are incredibly heavy.
They are essentially giant sponges full of water and dense plant matter. They act like massive sails at the top of a mast. When a heavy storm hits, they catch all the wind. If your stalk isn't internally reinforced, snap.
You lose the entire main branch.
Right, which is exactly why the potassium we just talked about and silica from the soil were so vital. They physically harden the cellulose in the cell walls. You spent 6 months building a structure specifically capable of holding up the immense weight of its own success.
That brings us to the finish line. Section 6, the harvest. And really a return to the broader MadLabz context we started with. How do you actually know when the plant is done? Because a guide does not just give you a date. It doesn't say go chop it down on October 15th.
No, a calendar date is useless because every microclimate is different. It gives you biological telemetry signals.
Telemetry, I love that. What are we looking for?
It is all about reading the trichomes and the pistils. The trichomes are those microscopic mushroom-shaped resin glands that cover the flowers. That's where all the active compounds are stored.
But they are tiny, right? You can't just see them from across the yard.
No, you need a tool, a jeweler's loupe, a small, high-powered magnifying glass, which hilariously MadLabz also sells on their eBay page.
Of course they do. Cross-selling at its finest.
Right. So you look through the loupe, and the guide gives you a strict color-coded traffic light system.
Okay, break down the colors.
If the trichome heads are perfectly clear, like a glass, it means you are too early. The plant is still filling those heads with compounds. They aren't potent yet.
Okay, so clear means wait.
If the heads turn cloudy or milky white, that indicates absolute peak THC levels. That is the maximum psychoactive potential of the plant.
The green light.
And if you wait even longer, the heads start turning an amber or rusty brown color. That means the THC is actively degrading into CBN, which creates a much more heavy sedative effect.
So you are visually monitoring the chemical degradation of the resin in real time.
Yes. And you cross-reference that by looking at the pistils. Those are the little hair-like structures sticking out of the buds. When they are straight and white, the plant is still building new mass. When they turn orange or brown and physically curl inward into the flower, the growth has ceased.
It's locked in.
MadLabz describes spotting these combined signals as the final culmination of growth, a moment to pause and reflect on the system you built.
And speaking of reflection, I really want to circle back to that eBay connection we started the show with.
Yeah.
Because when you read this final chapter on the harvest, where they detail the exact humidity levels for hanging and drying the plants in total darkness to perfectly preserve the volatile terpenes.
Yeah.
And you compare that incredible precision to the other random things MadLabz is selling. It really clicks for me now. The picture makes sense.
It's the ultimate manifestation of the modern maker identity.
Yes. Think about it. This person is designing and selling 3D printed subwoofer boxes. Doing that requires a deep mathematical understanding of acoustics internal volume, and vibration dampening.
Right.
They are selling AT-mega microcontrollers. Selling those requires understanding logic gates, voltage regulation, and C++ code,
And then they write this incredibly deep guide on cannabis cultivation.
which requires an intimate understanding of soil biochemistry, solar geometry, and fluid dynamics.
Exactly. To MadLabz, the backyard garden is quite literally just another laboratory. It is just one more complex system to hack.
The medium changes, but the mindset never does.
Whether you are soldering wires on a custom circuit board or wiring together a subterranean mycorrhizal fungal network, the underlying philosophy is identical.
Understand the system, hack the variables, and optimize the output.
It makes the slogan on their eBay bio fit so perfectly.
Well, what's it again?
Expect the unexpected.
It really is perfect. You stumble onto this page looking for a replacement integrated circuit chip for your broken refrigerator, which they also carry, by the way,
Naturally.
and you walk away with a graduate-level masterclass in botanical engineering.
It's incredibly refreshing. It paints this picture of extreme modern competence. It proves you don't have to be pigeonholed into just one aesthetic. You can be a hardcore electronics geek, an audiophile, and an elite organic farmer all at the same time.
Because the underlying skill sets overlap far more than society tells us they do, systems thinking is universal.
It applies everywhere.
So to bring this whole deep dive home, we've unpacked the soil, acting as a brain, the dual-layer pipe hydration system, the intense solar mapping, and the ruthless canopy sculpting. What is the single biggest takeaway from all these sources for you?
For me, it is that sheer synthesis of the MadLabz method. It elevates gardening from a passive hobby to an integrated applied science. It's biology and physics working together.
It totally dissolves that artificial line we draw between what is natural and what is engineered.
Exactly. It's not a story of man fighting against nature or trying to dominate it with chemicals. It is man deeply understanding nature and optimizing its own internal processes.
Right. Working with the machine instead of replacing it.
And the beauty is that this lesson applies to literally anything. Whether you are trying to grow massive tomatoes in your backyard, coding a new microcontroller from scratch, or carefully restoring a vintage VHS tape, success only comes from truly understanding the underlying inputs and outputs.
You can't just throw parts at a problem and hope for the best.
You have to know how the mechanism actually functions. If you master systems thinking you can grow massive resinous colas and you can build a killer subwoofer.
It's a great empowering takeaway.
Yeah.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought, something that hit me while we were breaking down the section on the Wood Wide Web.
Okay.
We talked for a long time about how the soil is functionally a brain, and the fungal roots are essentially a living internet, actively communicating, calculating threats, and trading resources with the world around them.
The massive underground intelligence network.
Right. So if the dirt under our feet is literally a computing brain, and the roots are the fiber optic connections, are we humans really the master farmers here?
Sure, Matt.
Or are we actually just the IT support staff for a much, much older intelligence?
That is an incredibly humbling thought. We show up, we bring the water, we bury the fish, but the actual genius, the real processing power is entirely in the dirt.
We're just the sysadmins running around frantically trying to keep the servers from crashing.
Just plugging in the cables.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the strange and fascinating world of MadLabz. We'll see you all next time.